Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. I'm Benjamin Red, joined by Nizar Hassan. Hey, how's it going?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing I'm doing wonderful. We've got tons to talk about this week.
Yes, we do.
We're gonna do like a quick rundown of what's gone on this week, and then we are going to get into pollution and is it safe to swim specifically? Is because I mean
The big
it's
question.
yeah, it's summer, it's hot. Everybody wants to like have a dip in the Mediterranean. We live on the goddamn Mediterranean Sea, right? Like it's a wonderful idea to go and swim, right? Especially in weather like we're having right now. But that may not be the smartest thing for you to do, and we're gonna tell you why later on in the podcast. But first off, this past week we had a lot of things go on. We had this activist, Wadi Al Asmar, who is the president of the Lebanese Center for Human Rights. He was also one of the co-founders of the You Stink movement, if you remember back in 2015, all the trash protests and everything. He was summoned this week by the ISF. The Cybercrimes Bureau of the ISF said, we need to talk to you about things that you've been posting online. And this sort of set off a shitstorm.
Yeah.
This has been going on. This has been a continuing story, and it has intensified in the past several weeks.
I think he's the seventh activist to be summoned in the past 2 months.
Right, and like it seems like they're big names. So like he's a relatively big name that's being summoned as well, right?
Yeah, he's a famous activist. Yeah.
Right. And so he announced that I think on Thursday he announced on Twitter that I've been summoned to like go in and explain my social media tweets or whatever to the ISF. And then on Friday, we had this massive show of force, right? We had 18 NGOs, like prominent NGOs, come out and sign an open letter to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid bin Rad Hussein, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression, David Kay, calling on them to sort of get involved and denounce what they see as violations of speech and opinion here in Lebanon, and it's really striking because in that open letter, they called out the ISF Cybercrimes Bureau and the Military Tribunal. Which is pretty mind-blowing. In Lebanese politics, you don't go after the security services. Like that's rule number one. And so I can't think of a time in recent memory where this has been as big of sort of like public call out of a military institution, of multiple military institutions, as this.
Yeah, I think this started mostly, especially the attacks against the military tribunal started with the protests of 2015. Not started actually, but were intensified after the protests because they were summoning all these activists or arresting people and then prosecuting them in the military tribunal, even though they had nothing to do with like attacking officers of this or anything of the sort.
Right.
But because of the clashes with riot police, they would refer them all to the military tribunal, and there's a widely held demand that this tribunal should be abolished because it was an exceptional court that was created at a specific moment and should not have been permanent, and also its jurisdiction should not include prosecuting civilians at all. It's just for military affairs. So
yeah, but the opposite is happening, right? It seems as though it just keeps growing, and this court there's just like less due process, it seems, and less oversight. And it's not a civilian court, it's a general who's judging you, right?
Exactly.
Yes. So I just want to read the money quote from this open letter. We urge you to publicly and strongly condemn these violations of the rights to freedoms of opinion, expression, association, and peaceful assembly in Lebanon. Basically, they want the UN to come in and sort of shame the security institutions. Which is, I don't know, my mind was blown.
Yeah, I mean, it should, I don't see any other way of doing this either, because what's happening is basically people are posting things on Facebook, just a status, mocking someone like an official like Gibran Basil or the president, or making a joke about, I don't know, religion, and then this bureau is calling them on WhatsApp or just a normal phone call and be like, you are summoned to a questioning or whatever. This is crazy because what you post on Facebook is not supposed to be like the same as posting in a newspaper article. But because we don't have the slander and defamation laws specifically for the internet, so what's happening is that this cybercrime bureau, which supposedly about cybercrime, is doing something totally out of its jurisdiction, which is summoning people for making jokes and saying mocking officials.
But see, they don't see it that way. They say we are just implementing the defamation code that's already in the Lebanese legal code, right? And not only that, on top of that, they're not acting like on their own. And this I absolutely agree with, right? They are actually acting on judges' orders. And from what I've heard, there are just a couple of judges who recently have had who've been a little bit active with their pen and signing with these kinds of warrants. And so the problem is, at least like sort of in defense of the ISF, the problem isn't as much with the Cybercrimes Bureau as with whoever's signing these warrants that they're carrying out. Because if you're a member of the ISF and you get a warrant, a legal warrant from a judge to call somebody in for questioning, you're going to do what's in that warrant. You don't have a choice.
But the thing that happened, for example, with Sharb al-Khouri, who was summoned because he made a joke about Mar Sharbil, a religious figure and very popular among Lebanese Christians. So he made a joke about that, and then he was summoned, and they told him, you have to deactivate your Facebook account for a month. Don't tell me this is normal or healthy judicial procedure. This is completely like spontaneous and unhealthy, you know.
But I mean, as far as that goes as well, I believe that's acting on judges' orders.
Which it's a problem. We can say
it's a huge problem. But I do think that okay, yes, there are a lot of issues with the military tribunal. There are a lot of issues with the ISF Cybercrimes Bureau, but we can't just put all the blame on them. We have to look at the judges and ultimately at the penal code itself. Maybe it's time for Parliament to step in and amend the penal code.
Exactly.
And do its job, right?
Yeah, exactly, and define what is slander and defamation on social media, on your personal account, and among other things.
Right. Also, just a quick note: Hajj begins Sunday night. So by the time you listen to this, Hajj will have begun, and also that means Eid al-Adha is next week. It's, I believe, 3 days this year here in Lebanon: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I've actually heard stories of like some people just shutting up shop for the entire week because might as well, give everybody an entire week off. Unfortunately, my bosses have not done that, so I'll be at work Monday and Friday and probably Sunday as well. I wanted to also note that this is something we're going to see over the next week. We have the UNIFIL mandate expiring at the end of August. And this is a thing that happens every year at the end of August. And so every year you see this sort of like Lebanese government requests that they renew this, and then the Security Council will vote and renew it. Last year it became sort of a big deal because Nikki Haley, the U.S. representative at the UN, very hawkish. She came out against UNIFIL and wanted things changed. She lobbed like personal insults at the commander of UNIFIL. And so this year, I don't know if there will be fireworks or not, but this is a process that you'll be seeing in the news over the next week. And if there is anything interesting, of course, we'll talk about it next week.
What about cabinet formation? You haven't told us anything about it yet.
Oh, did anything happen this week?
I don't know. you keep the count.
It has been 88 days as of Monday, 88 days since Hariri was designated, and we're moving into the time that I'm a little bit optimistic about, actually. So at the end of the week, we will hit the 3-month mark since Hariri was designated. And I've always thought like 3-4 months, somewhere in that time frame is a good time to form a government. Because we go back to past practice. In 2009, it took Hariri about 4.5 months. Same in 2011, it took Mikati about 4.5 months. And so from here out, the next month and a half or so, I think is sort of like the golden period for forming a government. And we also have, like right now it's August, there's tons of people who are just like off on vacation, on holiday, but they'll be coming back in September. And in September, we have things like the school year starting up, administrative things start to kick off again. And that's really when having a government is a good thing to have. So it seems as though, okay, if we want to keep with this precedent that was established by Hariri in 2009 and Mikati in 2011, and if we want to have a government when all of these administrative things start kicking in, then this is a good time to like get down to work and finally, make those hard calls, do the negotiations, get whatever deal you can, and khalas. Yeah. That's it. That being said, though, this week we had a new obstacle show up, and that's Syria, right? So there was a suggestion that cabinet formation should be predicated, maybe, on normalizing relations with Syria. And Hariri just absolutely shut that down, which I think that makes sense. Like, if you're Hariri, you want normalization with Syria to happen on your terms, right? Of course. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think that Hariri is like fundamentally against normalizing ties with Syria because there are so many interests that Lebanon shares with Syria. And also, Saudi Arabia has already signaled that it would be accepting Bashar al-Assad at some point in the future. So, it makes sense that this will happen, but Hariri was just sort of saying, like, not yet, guys. We're not at that point where I'm ready to, sign on the dotted line and, visit Damascus and say hello to Bashar al-Assad. Speaking of, like, foreign countries, we also have Russia seemingly getting involved in this process as well this week, which I think is really interesting. So I think, like, a couple, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Timur Jumblat visited Moscow. And then this week we had Talal Arslan, Jumblat's rival, right? Also visit Moscow. We had an advisor for Hariri visiting Moscow, and this week we are going to have Gibran Bassil, the foreign minister, will be visiting Moscow. So we're not entirely sure what all they're talking about, but it seems to me as though maybe Russia is involved in some discussions about this, right?
Yeah, but it's surprising to me that Jumblat and Arslan would visit Moscow if it's about the government. Like, Moscow is involved in which Druze cabinet seat goes to whom. That's quite surprising. That's impressive.
It's getting down in the weeds. Yeah. But I have a theory, right, that this whole debate about cabinet isn't so much about seat allocation.
By that you mean like number of seats?
Yeah, the number of seats. I don't like, everybody talks about this, right? That, how many seats is the LF going to get compared to the FPM, and is Wally Jumblat going to get 3 or 2 seats? That I don't think is really the real negotiation happening right now. I think that instead of that, the real negotiation is happening over which specific ministries people get. Okay. So we know, because if you look at the numbers, everything sort of like breaks down in like, we know the rough numbers, right? Okay, Jumblat's going to get either 2 or 3. The FPM is going to get 9 or 10, most likely, right? And so the range for negotiations over these numbers isn't great, and it also doesn't necessarily have, I don't think, great significance for what people can do in the next government. There's no way that Bassil is going to get a blocking third in the cabinet. Other people will not allow that to happen, right? And so, okay, he gets either 9 or 10. Does it really matter if he gets 9 or 10? Is that one seat going to make a huge difference? It's better to have one more seat, but I don't think it's some grand thing. Much more important is, what is that seat? Which portfolios are you going to control? Which budgets are you going to control? And so with this, we talked about sovereign ministries before. These are set. I don't think that there's really any way that these things change. Nabi Berri has been very clear he is not giving out the finance ministry. I think that the FPM isn't going to budge either on their 2 sovereign ministries. And of course, the future will not give up. They have to have a sovereign ministry. And so I think those are really hard to change, even though the LF keeps saying, we want a sovereign ministry. But I think that the LF would settle for not having a sovereign ministry if they got I don't know, telecommunications or something like another ministry, one of the one of those sort of second tier ministries. So if you got the 4 sovereign ministries in Lebanon, then you've got like the second tier of about 8 ministries, right? That are service oriented, or things like public works and transportation controls. All of these interesting facets of Lebanon and of the Lebanese bureaucracy and a lot of contracts and everything. It's a very powerful position to have.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think really where the negotiations are happening is in the second tier. So yeah, I don't have any direct evidence of this, but it makes sense to me. It makes logical sense. And also, like, you just see these things in the media that supposedly, Merida really, really wants to hold on to the public works ministry, that Hezbollah really, really wants a service ministry.
Or the planning ministry, which Hezbollah is trying to reactivate.
Right, right. So these things, it seems to me as though the discussion about the number of seats is really just like an impoverished discussion of what's really going on behind the scenes and the intricacy of the negotiations that must be taking place right now.
Definitely. And I think from my understanding of the Lebanese system, this makes total sense because yes, it's nice to have the foreign and defense ministries. It's a lot of prestige. It's internationally recognized as a main player in Lebanon and all of that. But when you have a service ministry, you're providing services to people, and to people that you want to provide services to more than others, more easily.
Right, right.
This is how they give back to people who have voted for them or who have funded their political campaigns.
Yeah, this is the real Lebanese system.
Yeah, this is how it works. So you need service ministries, and you need ministries that have big contracts to give. So not the environment ministry for sure. We'll talk about that later. And not any ministry that has a tiny little budget. You need ministries that provide real services, health, education, or contracts.
Yeah, exactly. But speaking of the environment ministry, the big question right now is it safe to swim in the sea, right?
This is the big question indeed.
So like all of this kicked off, like a month and a half ago with this, like media reports about this report that came from the Lebanese Agricultural Research Institute, which is a government like research body. And what they had done is they tested the waters like in 2016 and 2017, and they came out and said like everything is polluted.
Yeah. It's not safe to swim anywhere. That's what they said, right? It's contaminated.
Yeah, the director general of the institute, a man by the name of Michel Efrem, he said, I think he said this in remarks to my colleague Victoria Yan at the Daily Star, quote, in 2016, we ran tests across the country in different areas along the coast. The results were bad. In 2017, we ran the same tests along the entire coast, and everything came back dangerously contaminated. The sea along Lebanon's coast is extremely polluted. This is nothing new, but it is surely getting worse.
Yeah, this is
a damning quote, right? and so like this really was a media sensation. Got lots and lots of coverage. And people started asking, well, is it safe, right?
Yeah, but then you had this other major report by the National Center for Scientific Research, which said...
Another state body.
Another state body. It's the main state body for scientific research. And it has inside it the Marine Studies Unit, which is a center that is specifically responsible for testing water across Lebanon's beaches and coasts, and say whether the water is polluted or not. This is its official responsibility. So this report was kind of an answer to that report, and a lot of media about it was specifically about this jurisdiction thing, saying you can't trust a report that does not come out of this institution specifically.
Yeah.
And this is interesting because of its content, right? Because this report said that the situation is something completely different than what the other report said. It has 25 stations, 25 permanent stations from which they take samples every month. And they did this study. They collected data from 2016 till 2018, so 2 years and a half. And the results are that out of these 25 spots on Lebanon's coast, only 5 of them are unsafe for swimming. So the vast majority is actually safe, with some of them falling in the good range and others in the medium range. And the 5 spots that are unsafe for swimming are Tripoli's public beach and Beirut's public beach, Ramlet al-Bayda, and the new lighthouse area on Beirut's Manara, near the Corniche, and an area in Batroun near the Salata chemicals factory, and an area in Antelias where the Antelias River ends. So the report says only these 5 spots are unsafe for swimming, and this is according to the methodology that follows WHO standards and is based on the colonies of bacteria measurements. So they measure how many colonies of bacteria there are in a specific spot, and the bacteria that they measure are fecal streptococci and fecal coliforms. So these are the 2 type of bacteria for people who are interested in these technical aspects.
I know the word fecal. I know what that means.
Yeah, we know but that means it
It's not
doesn't
good.
sound
Not
nice.
good.
So in Beirut, for example, you had this report saying that 2 of the 3 spots studied are very bad. They are unsafe for swimming. But one other spot is safe for swimming.
It's weird though, because like 2 of these locations, the Menara location and the harbor, are really close to each other. They're like a stone's throw away. So why do you have such vastly different results for these 2 different locations?
Yeah, my guess would be that it depends on how close you are to a sewage outlet, because this is a study of fecal matters, right?
Right.
So your proximity to a sewage outlet is very important for the results.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that potentially explains one thing, but then why fundamentally was there this huge difference between these 2 reports as well? I don't understand that.
Me neither, to be honest.
And and as well, like we should note that there was like different methodologies used, different they're all very smart people who did these reports, but like 2 very different reports.
Yeah, but it's important to note that for CNRS, so for the more positive study, it's based only on 25 locations, right? 25 stations taking the samples. So it doesn't really cover all of the Lebanese coast. And what the head of the institution said in the press conference launching the report is that actually they wish they had more funds to do a wider study, a more comprehensive one. And he said, more importantly, he said that they did not take any samples from inside beach resorts, for example. So all the beaches mentioned were public beaches.
Right, okay.
Although all beaches in Lebanon are public, supposedly, but we know that 80% of the coast is privatized, so most of it is just managed by private resorts. And this is important because this matters most for consumers, right? For people just going to swim. Most of us just go to private resorts. And this means that if the state is not sure whether it's clean, it's safe to swim in these resorts, then we don't have any source of data to confirm. Because if you're in Beirut, what are your options? You cannot go to Ramlet al-Baida. It's super polluted.
Yeah.
According to this positive report, it's just unsafe to swim there. So there's no other way to swim in Beirut but to go to a private resort.
Yeah, yeah. So you better have some money. Yeah.
Exactly. And even if you have the money, you don't have the information whether the water is contaminated or not. So we cannot tell our listeners that it's safe to swim anywhere because this study is only concerned with public beaches.
Right, right. So, I mean, it seems as though maybe take all of these results with, like, the caution that you should, and maybe don't swim, right? I think it's interesting, though, as well, just how this has captured public attention. So we talked a little bit about how the Larry Report really kicked off a lot of media coverage and everything. But also, you just see on social media, like we had these results, supposed results from AUB Beach, which is very close to the Menara and the other site as well. These results supposedly saying, like, one of them said, oh, it's clean. The other one said, oh, it's dirty. And these just spread like wildfire on the internet, really showing that people are genuinely interested in just how polluted their beaches and their coast and the water is, which also plays into, like, so there's that psychological effect, right? But then there's also a real world effect as well. So we have reports that businesses along the coast have been seeing fewer customers, and of course that is impacting their bottom lines, which is not great because this is the time that these businesses make money. They don't make money in the middle of winter. They make money in the summer. And so if they're seeing like a steep decline, Victoria Yan of the Daily Star, who's been on an absolute tear about this subject lately, she went and interviewed people down in Sur, in the public beach down there, and I think they said something like they're like one of the one of the owners of one of the huts on the beach said that their business was down like 80% or something.
Mm-hmm.
So we see this on a business level, and then there's also been these sort of unconfirmed reports swirling around about people having to go to the doctor for weird rashes and like infections and stuff like that that may have been caused by swimming in the sea.
Yeah,
right?
a lot of those pictures going viral.
So since we're the Lebanese politics podcast, we shouldn't just talk about swimming and whether or not you should or not. We should talk about like why does this problem happen, or like why does this exist, and like what are the solutions to it, right? From like a policy standpoint. I mean, obviously we've got solid waste. We've got like landfills right on the sea. We like to build landfills on the sea for some reason. So like here in Beirut, we've got the Costa Brava, we've got Burj Hamud. The trash mountain in Tripoli is threatening to like collapse into the sea. There's definitely the solid waste angle there, but there's also, like you mentioned, wastewater, right?
Of course, yeah. The problem with dumping sewage in the sea without any treatment or with very basic treatment is also a big source of pollution, specifically for beaches where people swim.
Yeah, yeah. And then also we just have like the assholes, right, who litter and pollute and
people who own businesses or even individuals who just throw their garbage or their chemicals in the sea are a big problem. But I think it's important to look at like the legal framework of this, to know not only the source of pollution but also who's responsible for making sure it's not the case in the first place, right? Because
right.
This is a problem in Lebanon that we rarely point fingers at a specific institution.
Yeah.
We're always like, this whole system sucks, which is true, but still. In case of the environment, it's an interesting maze that we have. So we have this environment protection law that is good. It has good standards. It was passed in 2002, called Law 444. And it's meant to be like the legal framework for protecting the environment as a whole. Article 29 in this law says that the Environment Ministry is responsible. So we have the main responsibility falling in the hands of the Environment Ministry to protect the beaches from pollution, but also in coordination with Public Works Ministry and other specialized institutions. And this specialized institutions thing is meant to point at institutions that have specific roles and specific projects to give, for example, permits or to do certain inspections. So, for example, if you're planning to build a beach resort, you need to do an environmental impact assessment. So when you do that, you have to submit it in the file that you submit to the Directorate General of Urban Planning, which would give you the permit to build. So the Directorate General of Urban Planning is one of these specialized institutions who have a partial responsibility in protecting the environment indirectly by requiring certain documents, for example. And also, maybe more importantly for the specific topic of sea pollution, is the Barcelona Convention, which is a United Nations treaty called originally the Convention for the Protection of the Mediterranean Sea Against Pollution, and then they amended it and gave it a much more technical but also boring title, which I'm not going to read. And
Barcelona just sounds easier. The Barcelona
the
Convention.
Barcelona Convention is great.
Nobody's going to remember, yeah.
And basically, it's a good thing because this convention is good. At the same time, in Lebanon, international conventions are above local laws. So when you have when you ratify an international convention as a state, it has the higher legal value, higher than your local laws. It becomes the legal priority and the ultimate reference.
Yeah. Okay.
So then they have to modify local laws to meet this, the standards of the international convention. But the problem is that Lebanon has not ratified all the protocols, which are the documents that specify certain commitments of this convention. So we have 3 protocols that have not been ratified, and then the rest of the protocols have had amendments over the years, because this goes back to the 70s. So 20 years later, they had many amendments, but these amendments require the states to actually abide by them and change certain things. So Lebanon has not been doing that. It's not following up on its commitments. And another issue is that laws in Lebanon are not specific enough to meet the requirement of the convention, or even what its environment protection law says states. So what we need is, in terms of legal reform, is a lot of implementation decrees, or often called application decrees, where basically the government specifies which state institution is responsible for implementing which side of a specific law, which aspect of a specific law.
Right. This is a common thing.
Exactly.
For basically any law that passes, you can't just say in Lebanon, "Oh, the law passed," and celebrate. No, we've got a ton of laws on the books that are not being implemented because these decrees have not gone through cabinet yet.
Definitely. And in this specific case, we have 36 decrees that are required by the Lebanese for law, right? The one passed
The
in 2002.
overarching law from 2012 or 2002, right?
Exactly. And the 4 major decrees for its implementation were only passed 10 years after the law was passed. So for 10 years, we had literally nothing. So what this means is that we still need to implement a lot of application decrees for the law in order to be actually implementing it effectively.
Yeah. So like right now, it's like partway in force, sort
Exactly.
of. Okay.
And also, it's a big problem because apart from the legal issues, practically, the Environment Ministry has not been doing a great job in this. So, first of all, we have not had environment ministers that are very excited to be, determined to be like activating this ministry and cracking down on violations. We have not seen a lot of attention to this ministry at all. But more importantly, because the ministry has been receiving ridiculously low state funding. So the numbers from 2017-2018 is 0.04 and 0.06 of the budget, but it's exactly the same number because the budget decreased a bit. It's $9.3 million for a whole year.
Yeah, and this is like the environment ministry. It's like we were talking about the tiers of ministries, right? So you got the top tier, that's the like 4 sovereign ministries. Then you got like tier 2, which is like big budget ministries and really important ministries, and then you got like this bottom tier of ministries. The environment ministry is one of those bottom tier ministries.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It's literally like depending on how you count it, it's like the 3rd or 4th cheapest ministry in the budget.
Yeah. And it's a shame because we have all of these problems, and what this lack of state funding means is that we don't have the human resources required for the Environment Ministry to do the necessary inspection to make sure that these projects and cities in Lebanon are abiding by environmental regulations, to make sure that the laws are implemented. Specifically, in the case of staff, we have a 50% shortage according to a World Bank report. So we have 50% fewer technical staff than we need to be doing the proper inspections.
And can I just note here, this is not unique to the Environment Ministry. This is across basically the entire bureaucracy. We see underfunding. We see staff positions that just aren't filled. We see staff positions as well that are filled by people who shouldn't be filling them, who are not competent or do not have like the requisite qualifications to be filling them. So this is not just things are bad at the Environment Ministry, but this goes for basically every other state institution as well.
Definitely, this is the major challenge or the major scandal of Lebanese institutions, right?
Yeah.
And this has like many kind of bad impacts. One of them is that because you don't have the human resources, then you would outsource a lot of the work to private companies. You don't have technical experts, you need private experts. You outsource it, and then first you don't build the knowledge inside the institution, but second you pay higher salaries than you would to your own staff. This is one of the problems, and it also intersects with like political favors, business favors, but from politicians, and all of the possible cronyism and corruption that might happen there. But another issue, the more practical one, is that the major way in which the Environment Ministry inspects or monitors the environmental situation is through environmental impact assessment. So any project that is large enough to form a threat to the environment has to do this environmental impact assessment, and all projects on the sea coast have to do that. So, but the problem is that private companies have the freedom of choosing their own consultants, their own environmental consultants to do the studies, right? This
That
system
sounds
is
like
not.
that should not be the case.
Yeah, but this system is not unique to Lebanon. It's just it's just a market solution to like giving less and less responsibilities to the state institutions.
Right.
Instead of the state having to inspect everything and do the environmental regulations for every project, The project developers themselves contract an environmental consultant. The environmental consultant does the impact study, the environmental impact assessment, and they submit this assessment to the ministry. But then the ministry has to inspect during the study and after the study, during the development of the project, whether the developers are keeping their words, right? Whether they are making good on their environmental promises or commitments.
Okay, yeah.
But this cannot happen if the ministry does not have the required human resources again. So this is how having ridiculously low state funding means not being able to inspect a lot of projects, and means a lot of developed business people having the freedom of polluting the environment much more than they should. So the only mechanism of accountability that we have, direct mechanism of accountability, is that these projects have to have public hearings, which are kind of like town hall meetings where developers get the environmental consultants to explain to people how this project will respect the environment, and then people can raise concerns and objections. But this is really not enough unless you have the ministry following up on the actual ground inspection of everything.
Yeah, right.
And another issue, practical issue, is that some of the aspects of the law, for example, like the National Council for the Environment, which was only established in 2012, 10 years after the law was passed, in one of the decrees that we mentioned, only has an advisory role. So we have, for example, a civil society representative on this council, but the council is barely active. It only meets once every few months, and it's not very active. So this is another institution that's kind of dormant. And then coming back to the main source of pollution for our topic, sea pollution, right? The main source of pollution being fecal matters coming from wastewater, the dumping of sewage. We see here another issue, which is that the state has not been implementing the necessary projects to purify and recycle the water, the wastewater, before dumping it in the sea. So, for example, in Beirut, we have the famous Ghadir refinery, a station that receives wastewater, treats it before it goes to being dumped in the sea. It's not technologically sophisticated enough to do the purification as per the standards of this environment ministry itself. So, for example, we have the primary kind of treatment, whereby it's basic filtration and settling of the wastewater, and we have secondary treatment, which is more sophisticated and meets the health standards. But our refineries are too weak, and we have too few refineries in the first place to be treating wastewater, which is the main source of pollution.
So like in Remedelbeide, there is a wastewater river, right? That just flows literally on the beach, and it goes out to the sea, right next to the new development, the Ashura development that we spoke about a few episodes ago. And I used to kind of have a soft spot for this river, because before Ashur came in and built that development, there was this double waterfall double waste waterfall that then went out onto the beach and into the sea. And it was if you didn't breathe, it was kind of beautiful, but so the thing that confused me a little bit, and I'm glad that you explained this primary and secondary treatment thing to me, is that we know in Beirut there's one sewage network, right? So everything goes down the same hole, down the same pipes, to the same places, right? But if you went to this double waterfall, and today if you go to the waterfallless river that's still there flowing into the sea of wastewater, it doesn't smell like shit. It literally just smells like cleaning products, And so I thought, I was confused, and I thought, well, maybe it is fine, I mean, it's obviously not good that cleaning chemicals get dumped into the sea or anything, but now I know, no, there is fecal matter in there as well.
Yeah, you just don't see it.
Yeah. So this all just brings it back to the original question, though. Is it safe to swim?
We can't say so, right? Otherwise, we might be committing, health crimes.
I don't want to be responsible for somebody else getting sick. I think the answer is no, it's probably not safe to swim, and it probably isn't going to get better anytime soon either, right?
Yeah.
This isn't. Yeah.
Unless we have a major change in policy, there's no way this is going to improve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're still dumping garbage in this coastal landfills. They're still dumping the sewage with basic treatment only. So we need real policies. We need real investments and alternative solutions, and this is not happening.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Of course, join us next week. We'll be back with another podcast. Until then, I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.